The Journal. Saturday, April the 6th. Every preparation likely to embarrass us having been made overnight, we commenced the inflation this morning at daybreak, but owing to a thick fog which encumbered the folds of the silk and rendered it unmanageable, we did not get through before nearly 11 o'clock. Cut loose then, in high spirits, and rose gently but steadily, with a light breeze at north, which bore us in the direction of the British Channel. Found the ascending force greater than we had expected, and as we arose higher, and so got clear of the cliffs, and more in the sun's rays, our ascent became very rapid. I did not wish, however, to lose gas at so early a period of the adventure, and so concluded to ascend for the present. We soon ran out our guide rope, but even when we had raised it clear of the earth, we still went up very rapidly. The balloon was unusually steady and looked beautifully. In about 10 minutes after starting, the barometer indicated an altitude of 15,000 feet. The weather was remarkably fine, and the view of the subjacent country, a most romantic one when seen from any point, was now especially sublime. The numerous deep gorges presented the appearance of lakes on account of the dense vapors with which they were filled, and the pinnacles and crags to the southeast, piled in inextricable confusion, resembling nothing so much as the giant cities of Eastern fable. We were rapidly approaching the mountains in the south, but our elevation was more than sufficient to enable us to pass them in safety. In a few minutes we soared over them in fine style, and Mr. Ainsworth, with the seamen, was surprised at their apparent want of altitude when viewed from the car, the tendency of great elevation in a balloon being to reduce inequalities of the surface below to nearly a dead level. At 11:30, still proceeding nearly south, we obtained our first view of the Bristol Channel, and in 15 minutes afterward the line of breakers on the coast appeared immediately beneath us, and we were fairly out at sea. We now resolved to let off enough gas to bring our guide rope, with the buoys affixed, into the water. This was immediately done, and we commenced a gradual descent. In about 20 minutes our first buoy dipped, and at the touch of the second soon afterward we remained stationary as to elevation. We were all now anxious to test the efficiency of the rudder and screw, and we put them both into requisition forthwith, for the purpose of altering our direction more to the eastward and in a line for Paris. By means of the rudder we instantly effected the necessary change of direction, and our course was brought nearly at right angles to that of the wind, when we set in motion the spring of the screw, and were rejoiced to find it propel us readily as desired. Upon this we gave 9 hearty cheers, and dropped in the sea a bottle enclosing a slip of parchment with a brief account of the principle of the invention. Hardly, however, had we done with our rejoicings when an unforeseen accident occurred, which discouraged us in no little degree. The steel rod connecting the spring with the propeller was suddenly jerked out of place at the car end by a swaying of the car through some movement of one of the 2 seamen we had taken up, and in an instant hung dangling out of reach from the pivot of the axis of the screw. While we were endeavoring to regain it, our attention being completely absorbed, we became involved in a strong current of wind from the east, which bore us, with rapidly increasing force, toward the Atlantic. We soon found ourselves driving out to sea at a rate of not less, certainly, than 50 or 60 miles per hour, so that we came up with Cape Clear at some 40 miles to our north before we had secured the rod and had time to think what we were about. It was now that Mr. Ainsworth made an extraordinary, but to my fancy a by no means unreasonable or chimerical proposition, in which he was instantly seconded by Mr. Holland, viz., that we should take advantage of the strong gale which bore us on, and in place of beating back to Paris, make an attempt to reach the coast of North America. After slight reflection, I gave a willing assent to this bold proposition, which, strange to say, met with objection from the two seamen only. As the stronger party, however, we overruled their fears and kept resolutely upon our course. We steered due west, but as the trailing of the buoys materially impeded our progress, and we had the balloon abundantly at command either for ascent or descent, we first threw out 50 pounds of ballast, and then wound up, by means of a windlass, so much of the rope as brought it quite clear out of the sea. We perceived the effect of this maneuver immediately in a vastly increased rate of progress, and as the gale freshened, we flew with a velocity nearly inconceivable, the guide rope flying out behind the car, like a streamer from a vessel. It is needless to say that a very short time sufficed us to lose sight of the coast. We passed over innumerable vessels of all kinds, a few of which were endeavoring to beat up, but the most of them lying to. We occasioned the greatest excitement on board all, an excitement greatly relished by ourselves, and especially by our two men, who, now under the influence of a dram of Geneva, seemed resolved to give all scruple or fear to the wind. Many of the vessels fired signal guns, and in all we were saluted with loud cheers, which we heard with surprising distinctness, and the waving of caps and handkerchiefs. We kept on in this manner throughout the day, with no material incident, and as the shades of night closed around us, we made a rough estimate of the distance traversed. It could not have been less than 500 miles, and was probably much more. The propeller was kept in constant operation, and no doubt aided our progress materially. As the sun went down, the gale freshened into an absolute hurricane, and the ocean beneath was clearly visible on account of its phosphorescence. The wind was from the east all night, and gave us the brightest omen of success. We suffered no little from cold, and the dampness of the atmosphere was most unpleasant, but the ample space in the car enabled us to lie down, and by means of cloaks and a few blankets, we did sufficiently well. P.S. by Mr. Ainsworth. The last 9 hours have been unquestionably the most exciting of my life. I can conceive nothing more sublimating than the strange peril and novelty of an adventure such as this. May God grant that we succeed. I ask not success for mere safety to my insignificant person, but for the sake of human knowledge, and for the vastness of the triumph. And yet the feat is only so evidently feasible that the sole wonder is why men have scrupled to attempt it before. One single gale, such as now befriends us, let such a tempest whirl forward a balloon of 4 or 5 days. Let such a tempest whirl forward a balloon for 4 or 5 days. These gales often last longer, and the voyage will be easily borne in that period from coast to coast. In view of such a gale, the broad Atlantic becomes a mere lake. I am more struck just now with the supreme silence which reigns in the sea beneath us, notwithstanding its agitation, than with any other phenomenon presenting itself. The waters give up no voice to the heavens. The immense flaming ocean writhes and is tortured uncomplainingly. The mountainous surges suggest the idea of innumerable dumb gigantic fiends struggling in impotent agony. In a night such as this, to me, a man lives a whole century of ordinary life, nor would I forego this rapturous delight for that of a whole century of ordinary existence. Saturday the 7th, Mr. Mason's MS. This morning, the gale by 10 had subsided to an 8 or 9 knot breeze for a vessel at sea, and bears us perhaps 30 miles per hour or more. It has veered, however, very considerably to the north, and now at sundown we are holding our course due west, principally by the screw and rudder, which answer their purposes to admiration. I regard the project as thoroughly successful, and the easy navigation of the air in any direction, not exactly in the teeth of a gale, as no longer problematical. We could not have made head against the strong wind of yesterday, but by ascending we might have got out of its influence if requisite. Against a pretty stiff breeze, I feel convinced we can make our way with the propeller. At noon today, ascended to an elevation of nearly 25,000 feet by discharging ballast. Did this to search for a more direct current, but found none so favorable as the one we are now in. We have an abundance of gas to take us across this small pond, even should the voyage last 3 weeks. I have not the slightest fear for the results. The difficulty has been strangely exaggerated and misapprehended. I can choose my current, and should I find all currents against me, I can make very tolerable headway with the propeller. We have had no incidents worth recording. The night promises fair. P.S. by Mr. Ainsworth. I have little to record except the fact, to me quite a surprising one, that at an elevation equal to that of Cotopaxi, I experienced neither very intense cold nor headache, nor difficulty of breathing. Neither, I find, did Mr. Mason nor Mr. Holland, nor Sir Everard. Mr. Osborne complained of constriction of the chest, but this soon wore off. We have flown at a great rate during the day, and we must be more than halfway across the Atlantic. We have passed over some 20 or 30 vessels of various kinds, and all seem to be delightfully astonished. Crossing the ocean in a balloon is not so difficult a feat after all. Omne ignotum pro magnifico. Mem. At 20,000 feet, elevation, memorandum. At 20,000 feet elevation, the sky... Memo? Memo. At 20,000 feet elevation, the sky appears nearly black, and the stars are distinctly visible, while the sea does not seem convex, as one might suppose, but absolutely and most unequivocally concave. Monday, the 8th, Mr. Mason's MS. This morning we had again some little trouble with the rod of the propeller, which must be entirely remodeled for fear of serious accident. I mean the steel rod, not the vanes. The latter could not be improved. The wind has been blowing steadily and strongly from the northeast all day, and so far fortune seems bent upon favoring us. Just before day, we were all somewhat alarmed at some odd noises and concussions in the balloon, accompanied with the apparent rapid subsidence of the whole machine. These phenomena were occasioned by the expansion of the gas through increase of heat in the atmosphere and the consequent disruption of the minute particles of ice with which the network had become encrusted during the night. Threw down several bottles to the vessels below. See one of them picked up by a large ship, seemingly one of the New York line packets. Endeavored to make out her name, but could not be sure of it. Mr. Osborne's telescope made it out something like Atalanta. It is now 12 at night, and we are still going nearly west at a rapid pace. The sea is peculiarly phosphorescent. P.S. by Mr. Ainsworth. It is now 2 a.m., and nearly calm, as well as I can judge, but it is very difficult to determine this point, since we move with the air so completely. I have not slept since quitting Wheelvore, but can stand it no longer, and must take a nap. We cannot be far from the American coast. Tuesday the 9th, Mr. Ainsworth's MS. 1 p.m. We are in full view of the low coast of South Carolina. The great problem is accomplished. We have crossed the Atlantic, fairly and easily crossed it in a balloon. God be praised. Who shall say that anything is impossible hereafter? The journal here ceases. Some particulars of the descent were communicated, however, by Mr. Ainsworth to Mr. Forsyth. It was nearly dead calm when the voyagers first came in view of the coast, which was immediately recognized by both the seamen and by Mr. Osborne. The latter gentleman having acquaintances at Fort Moultrie, it was immediately resolved to descend in its vicinity. The balloon was brought over the beach, the tide being out and the sand hard, smooth, and admirably adapted for a descent, and the grapnel let go, which took firm hold at once. The inhabitants of the island and of the fort thronged out, of course, to see the balloon, but it was with the greatest difficulty that anyone could be made to credit the actual voyage, the crossing of the Atlantic. The grapnel caught at 2 p.m. precisely, and thus the whole voyage was completed in 75 hours, or rather less, counting from shore to shore. No serious accident occurred, no real danger was at any time apprehended. The balloon was exhausted and secured without trouble, and when the MS from which this narrative is compiled was dispatched from Charleston, the party were still at Fort Moultrie. Their further intentions were not ascertained, but we can safely promise our readers some additional information either on Monday or in the course of the next day at furthest. This is unquestionably the most stupendous, the most interesting, and the most important undertaking ever accomplished or ever attempted by man. What magnificent events may ensue, it would be useless now to think of determining.